In previous videos, we lined the underside of the roof, then finished the walls by adding a fake post in the corner to cover one that was way out of plumb, then painted these for our front veranda restoration project. In this video, we'll be repainting the balustrades after only 5 years. Look at how to make this last longer and finish off other things that have been waiting a while too. The paint on the handrails is starting to peel off. In fact, it has been for the last year or two, and my balls have come loose. Although it is entertaining watching people lean on these and think they've broken them, but all this needs to be fixed up. We start by scraping any loose paint off the handrails, which is a very durable high gloss paint. Durable so far as physical wear and tear goes, but not so durable in the hot baking sun for 5 years. In fact, they started to peel after about 3 years. The reason for this is I used an oil-based paint to get a nice high gloss finish, which looks really nice and can't be achieved with a water-based paint. But a water-based paint doesn't peel in the hot sun like oil-based does. Oil-based enamel paint doesn't flex, so when exposed to the baking hot sun, gets micro cracks in it after only a couple of years. That lets rainwater in right down to the timber, that then rots just enough for the paint to start peeling. Water-based acrylic paint forms a plastic-like flexible film on the surface, which doesn't crack and is why it lasts a lot longer. The amount the paint peels depends on a few factors. The paint on the bottom rail of the balustrades has peeled off quite a bit more than the vertical slats. This is because the sun hits the horizontal rails a lot harder than the slats, causing those micro cracks, and rainwater tends to run off the slats and onto the rails and sits there until it can soak into those micro cracks. The veranda posts were also painted with oil-based paint on fairly green timber that had shrunk over the years as it has slowly dried, causing quite large cracks to appear, but the paint hasn't peeled off. Again, this is because they are vertical, so don't get as much sun and the rain runs off quite quickly. We'd like to repaint with the same oil-based high-gloss top coat because this is the look we like, but would rather it didn't start peeling in 3 years. So I got thinking, what if we used acrylic-based primer undercoat that forms that plastic skin so won't crack in the hot sun, then use oil-based paint on top of that, so if it micro cracks, water won't seep down to the timber, causing peeling. Okay, most painters say not to use water-based paint on top of oil-based, but I've found this is only true if it's high gloss and shiny. The secret to getting this to work is sand those handrails with some 80 grit sandpaper. What this does is it roughens the surface, giving the water-based acrylic primer undercoat something it can stick to, even outside. It's then also very important to clean off all the sanding dust and whatever grime has built up over the years, because no paint will stick to this very well. Then we can get on and apply our water-based acrylic primer to all the spots where we've gone down to bare timber or there's cracks or nail holes that need filling. Once the primer is dry, we then use the plaster-like filler from a pot to fill in the cracks and nail holes. This then needs sanding to get everything back smooth again as it was when first painted 5 years ago. And then some water-based acrylic undercoat is applied to all the filled-in spots, bare timber that has been primed, and the handrails where the colour of the finish coat is dark and the surface is shiny. So we want a nice consistent finish underneath. Once the undercoat is dry, the handrails must be sanded by hand with 240 grit sandpaper to get that nice smooth finish. And yes, you can sand water-based undercoat. You basically just need to sand it enough so it feels nice and smooth. We don't want it to be dead perfect, as we still want it to have plenty of character, just not too rough. Although I do like to have my balls nice and shiny. We can then get on and paint the top coat, starting with the olive green posts and veranda beams. The reason we're doing the olive green first is because it is easier to cut the dark green paint for the handrails into the posts than the other way around. We'll do the handrails next because it is easier to cut the paint for the slats into the bottom of the handrails than the other way around. We paint everything before sanding and oiling the deck because we will drop paint on the deck. It can't be helped even when using drop sheets, so this will come off when the deck is sanded. There was paint on there anyway that had to come off, so what's a little more? We'll be covering the sanding of the deck in a future video. When painting the walls and underside of the roof, there were large filled-in gaps we had to get paint into, and in doing this got paint on the olive green veranda posts and beams, so we're now having to touch these up along with other areas while we have the olive green paint in the brush. Saves having to wash the brush out more than necessary. We can then get on and start painting the high gloss dark green oil based top coat of the handrails. High gloss oil based paint does self level to a degree, which is necessary to get that high gloss finish, but the less of this it has to do the better. This property of the paint also makes it quite drippy. That is, it runs and drips more easily, so you can't put too much on at once. If the undercoat isn't really smooth, more than one coat is needed. It's quicker to give it a fine sand than paint that extra coat. It is common practice for paint shops to recommend when painting dark colours like this to use a tinted undercoat, which I was doing because that is what I was told, but being the type of person that challenges everything, I found this not to be true. So long as you use a high quality brush and work at getting an even thickness of paint, a single coat of dark colour top coat like this can cover a white undercoat, which is exactly what I've been doing here. I suspect the paint shops are just drumming up more business, because if you tinted your undercoat, you need to buy a different tub for each colour of top coat. I just buy one large tub of white for everything. That works fine and is a lot cheaper. It did take a while to finish painting the balustrades, because they are quite fiddly, and I had to get the paint nice and even so it would cover in one coat, but the results are well worth it. The paint does take a few hours to touch dry, so everyone in the household had to be threatened with death if they got near them. Couldn't help but get bits of dust blowing in the paint while it was still sticky. Once dried out properly, which takes a few days, this can most likely be polished out. On going over old pictures of the front veranda when making this video, we realised that the bushes in front of the veranda have grown quite a bit in the last 5 years, so the balustrades won't get as much sunlight as they did, which will also help prevent the paint from peeling. Now that everything else is nicely painted, the veranda brackets were looking a bit daggy, so we had to repaint these as well. Right, I'm now going to take my loose nice and shiny balls and glue them on. Now I've chosen to use silicone because in the past I used epoxy resin, which is supposed to be the glue of choice, but it's not flexible and it'll let water in there and eventually let go, which is why the knobs come loose. So I'm working on a new theory now where if I put silicone on there, the silicone will stop the water getting in, and the silicone is flexible. So when you get temperature changes, it's not going to come loose. And it holds on to paint and wood quite well. So tomorrow we will see. Right, it's now the next day. Will this knob hold on? It does. That's it for this video. In the next video we'll be capping the front deck of the veranda. At the moment it looks terrible.